Tonight we walk beneath a sky so wide it feels alive. The air over the Tang Dynasty capital hums with lantern smoke, temple bells, and the faraway scent of rain. You tilt your head, and thou it is, the same moon that once watched poets fall in love and bureaucrats lose their jobs, now framed by slow-moving clouds. They aren't just clouds tonight, they are whispers, living scrolls across the firmament. Somewhere behind you, a scholar in thin robes squints upward, brush poised as if ready to correct the sky's grammar. You can almost hear him sigh, "If heaven writes, I must learn to read it." You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not the story, exactly, just the mosquito swarms, the paper taxes, and the Tang-era plumbing. It's a messy century to drop into. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The evening deepens as you step through Luang's crowded streets. Silk merchants argue beneath hanging lanterns, their voices rising like heat. You pass scholars hunched at tea stalls, debating the movement of the stars with the same passion others reserve for gossip. In the Tang Empire, heaven isn't far away. It's a bureaucratic department with cloudy handwriting. Every eclipse, every comet, every change in wind direction must be logged, approved, and sent up the chain, from local astronomers to imperial diviners. The cosmos is paperwork. And in that paperwork lives one man who refuses to treat the sky as a simple filing cabinet. His name, though blurred by time, often appears beside the phrase "cloud records of the Great Harmony." Historians still argue whether he was named Shu Jiao or Jiao Shu, depending on which surviving manuscript you believe. Either way, he's the scholar who dared to classify vapor, centuries before the West thought to name a cumulus. Picture him on the city wall, robes pressed by the evening wind. He's supposed to be observing for omens, dragons, halos, and other heavenly hints of imperial fortune. But his sketching instead, tiny spirals, feather shapes, arcs of grey wash. He notices that some clouds build like mountains while others unfurl like silk. To him, they are not just messengers of rain, they are living hieroglyphs of air. A guard beside him yawns. "Why paint smoke?" he mutters. The scholar just smiles. "Because smoke changes," he answers softly. Below, Luoyang glimmers with candlelight, but above, the world is pure transition, vapor forever in rehearsal. He sees beauty in instability, structure in drift. It's a dangerous kind of thinking in an empire that prizes order. After all, the Tang court prefers patterns that stay put: tax records, grain tallies, border lines. Clouds, though, defy bureaucracy. Here's your mainstream fact. The Tang dynasty maintained one of the earliest recorded meteorological offices, the Bureau of Astronomy and Calendar Calculation. It kept meticulous weather logs, mostly to predict harvests and divine omens for the emperor. Yet those records mention clouds only in passing. Rainfall mattered, vapor did not. That's where our scholar comes in. He's not defying science, he's inventing it sideways. Ancient observers sometimes believed certain cloud shapes foretold not just weather but political events. A streak like a blade meant conflict. A spiral meant fertility. One account even claims that purple vapors heralded the birth of sages. Our scholar finds this both amusing and useful. "If I can name them," he muses, "perhaps I can tame their legends." He begins to keep a secret notebook, his Yun-Pu, or cloud register. In it he sketches everything: ink dark thunderheads, delicate cirrus that vanish mid-sentence. He labels them not with poetic names but with subtle descriptors: ascending, dispersing, clinging, drifting. Over time, he notices cycles, the same forms returning with the seasons. You watch as he begins to theorize that clouds are not divine spirits at all but physical phenomena shaped by temperature and wind. Radical stuff for someone whose colleagues still chart the mood swings of comets. But that's not what gets him in trouble. It's his metaphors. He writes that the empire itself is like a cloud, ever shifting yet whole. A poetic observation, yes, but one that a censor could read as political satire. In Tang China, metaphor can be fatal if it sounds like criticism. So he hides the manuscript beneath other scrolls, tax records, star charts, and boring treatises on grain prices. One evening, as the monsoon clouds gather, he confides to you, perhaps heaven wishes to be studied, but not too closely. He laughs, a small, tired sound, and returns to his sketches. Lightning flashes, illuminating a line he's written in the margin. Names give form to the formless. You feel a drop of rain. Then another. The storm builds with the quiet authority of an empire enforcing curfew. Yet he keeps drawing, paper soaking, brush trembling. That moment, ink bleeding with rain, is where his legend begins. Historians still argue whether his cloud register ever officially existed or whether later poets invented it as a metaphor for scholarly futility. Either way, the story survives because it feels true. Every civilization, sooner or later, produces someone who looks up and refuses to look away. The thunder fades. You and the scholar watch the night sky clear, stars returning one by one. He murmurs, tomorrow, new clouds. A new alphabet. You wonder if he means to describe them, or to rewrite the heavens altogether. Dawn rises pale and sticky, the color of old rice paper. You walk with the scholar through Luang's narrow alleys, where cockerels crow and students stagger toward the academy still half dreaming of exam answers. The streets hum with the rhythm of brush on parchment, everybody writing, copying, memoizing. In the Tang Empire, success isn't born, it's inked. And here, scholarship is both religion and bureaucracy. You can feel it in the air, dusty, disciplined, caffeinated with endless cups of green tea. The scholar moves through the crowd like mist, unnoticed but always watching. You follow him past scroll merchants, past an astrologer selling forecasts for a modest fee, and into the Imperial Academy itself. Inside, the walls are lined with bamboo strips and celestial diagrams. Imagine Hogwarts if every spell had to be approved by the Ministry of Finance. This is where the Empire trains its thinkers, the ones who read the stars, compose odes for harvest festivals, and predict when the Emperor should stay indoors to avoid bad omens. You find your seat in the lecture hall beside him. A tutor clears his throat and begins. Heaven's harmony is reflected in the Empire's order. Study one, understand the other. Everyone nods solemnly, except the scholar, who quietly sketches a cumulus in the margin of his notes. Mainstream fact. During the Tang dynasty, Chinese academies genuinely merged astronomy, mathematics, and statecraft. Sky watching wasn't just science, it was politics. Officials believed celestial events mirrored the moral state of rulers. A well-run government meant clear skies. Corruption brought storms. It was less weather report and more cosmic performance review. Our scholar listens politely, but his gaze keeps wandering toward the open courtyard where clouds drift lazily between tiled roofs. He notices how one curls inward, as though thinking. Another unfurls like silk being shaken out. To him, it feels like the sky is taking notes on them for a change. At lunch, a fellow student teases him, still drawing air, shoo? You'll never pass the exams that way. The scholar only smiles and replies, I'm studying what exams cannot measure. You like him immediately, the kind of quiet rebel who questions the syllabus without burning the library down. He spends nights copying astronomical treatises, comparing ancient diagrams from India and Persia. He's fascinated that different cultures interpret clouds so differently. Some believe they're the breath of dragons, others, the sweat of mountains. Perhaps everyone is right, he muses. Perhaps clouds are what each age needs them to be. Tang astronomers used a massive armillary sphere to chart the heavens, so large that one record claims a bird nested inside it. Our scholar sometimes sneaks up the observatory tower just to watch the operators turn the giant bronze rings. He notes how their movement mirrors the swirl of storm systems. Everything, it seems, circles something else. Historians still argue whether Chinese scholars of that era truly practiced empirical observation or simply described what they expected to see. Was it science or theater? You watch the scholar lean forward over his notes and decide it can be both. After all, sometimes belief is what keeps the brush moving. Evening brings a thunderless calm. He sits by a pond in the academy garden, dipping his brush in reflection rather than ink. Carp flicker just beneath the surface, blurring water into cloud shapes. You see, he whispers. The sky rehearses itself in everything. He sketches again, his strokes precise but dreamy, a language halfway between meteorology and poetry. You notice something strange in his notebook, small annotations beside each sketch. Not just names, but moods, hesitant, melancholy, eager. The scholar isn't cataloguing clouds, he's diagnosing them. To him, vapor has emotion, each formation a confession of air. It's beautiful, and maybe a little mad. When the academy's head instructor catches him sketching during a lecture on agricultural quotas, punishment is swift. He's assigned a month of copying imperial edicts by hand, 100 each night. You sit beside him as his wrist cramps, his eyes droop, yet between the characters for grain, tax, and obedience, he sneaks in tiny sketches of clouds. The most delicate rebellion imaginable. Late one night, he tells you, if heaven truly reflects human affairs, then perhaps the sky's disorder is mercy. It spares us from perfection. You almost laugh, but then realize he's serious. In a world where every mistake could cost one's career, he finds comfort in shapelessness. The next morning, an instructor lectures about celestial balance. The emperor's virtue sustains heaven's calm, he declares. When vice rises, storms follow. The scholar raises a hand, voice calm. Then what of a storm that nourishes fields and fills rivers? Is that not virtue too? The room freezes. You can practically hear careers evaporating. The instructor stammers something about metaphors, and class dismisses early. Afterward, a friend hisses, "You'll get yourself exiled." The scholar just shrugs. Perhaps the empire fears clouds because they cannot be taxed. Historians still argue whether that line ever appeared in his writings, or whether later storytellers added it to make him sound more heroic. Either way, it feels exactly like something he'd say, a whisper of rebellion wrapped in a metaphor soft enough to float. Weeks pass. The scholar's sketches multiply. He builds a private lexicon, 15 types of vapor, each with its own rhythm. He names them not for shape but for movement. The rising curtain, the wandering thread, the collapsing mountain. He experiments with pigments to capture their tones, using powdered pearl for bright cirrus and soot ink for rain clouds. His notebook becomes a small storm of artistry. Then one night, he steps outside after a late study session. The moonlight is thin, almost metallic. The clouds overhead stretch into strange streaks, as if brushed by an invisible painter. Heaven keeps no secrets, he murmurs. Only drafts. You look up too, and for a moment, the clouds seem to answer back, shifting, curling, rearranging themselves into unreadable calligraphy. You realize this scholar isn't just cataloging weather, he's decoding conversation. The empire writes down its decrees. The sky writes them back. You find yourself stepping backward through time, into a quieter courtyard lined with plum trees, where the scholar is not yet a scholar at all, just a barefoot boy with too much curiosity and too little patience for rules. The air smells of ink and rain-soaked clay. Cicadas hum so loudly they could be debating philosophy. The boy crouches by a puddle, tracing the shapes of clouds reflected there with a twig. Each ripple distorts the sky above, yet he seems to know exactly what he's drawing. His mother calls from the doorway, "Joe, you'll ruin your robe." He doesn't answer. He's busy labeling the puddle cloud with childish brushstrokes. Big sheep, broken curtain, lost boat. The family has no idea this small obsession will one day fill scrolls that outlive dynasties. Inside, his father rehearses Confucian sayings with weary insistence. "Study the classics, my son. Knowledge brings order." You can almost feel the generational weight of that phrase. But the boy's mind drifts elsewhere, to the skies outside, where the only order he sees is constant change. He sketches clouds in the margins of his calligraphy homework, tiny ghosts haunting the neat columns of characters. Mainstream historical fact: during the Tang period, literacy and scholarship were pathways to social mobility, but the imperial examinations demanded mastery of Confucian texts, not observation, not creativity. The empire needed obedient administrators, not dreamers with weather journals. So young Gao's cloud drawings were more than idle doodles. They were small acts of academic defiance. Still, his teacher tries to encourage him. "Write what you see," he says one afternoon, meaning copy the lesson. But Gao takes it literally. He looks up and writes, "The heavens bend their knee to no emperor." When the teacher reads that aloud, the room goes silent. "Very poetic," the man mutters, "and very dangerous." You can't help but grin. Even at 10 years old, he's already testing boundaries like a gust against a paper door. One afternoon, during a family trip to the marketplace, a sudden rainstorm scatters everyone under makeshift awnings. While adults curse the weather, young Joe stands in the open, soaked and smiling, eyes fixed upward. He notices how the storm arrives not as chaos but in layered patterns, thin cirrus preceding thicker sheets, then dark, swelling towers. He doesn't have the vocabulary yet, but the taxonomy has begun. Tang children sometimes collected sky stones, smooth pebbles thought to have fallen from clouds. They'd polish them and keep them as good luck charms. Gio keeps one in his pocket, believing it's a piece of solidified vapor. Later in life, he'll carve a tiny cloud glyph on it and use it as a paperweight for his notes. The pebble, improbably, will survive centuries longer than the notes themselves. Historians still argue whether the cloud register began as a childhood journal or a mature scholarly project. Some claim fragments found in Dunhuang's cave libraries were practice sketches from his youth, while others insist they were later forgeries. Either way, it's tempting to imagine this puddle drawing boy as the same man who would one day challenge imperial orthodoxy with brush and sky. You walk with him through his teenage years, awkward, brilliant, occasionally sullen. He studies under a local tutor famous for his strictness. The tutor believes everything in nature exists for moral instruction. A tree teaches patience, a river teaches humility, and a cloud, he pauses, teaches impermanence. Gao nods, but silently adds, and impermanence teaches truth. At night, he sneaks to the rooftop with an oil lamp, sketching by moonlight. He experiments with ways to capture transparency, using diluted ink and crushed mica dust. His lamp flickers, and the light dances across his paper like a passing storm. He's trying to paint something that refuses to hold still. By 16, Gao is expected to prepare for the counter-level examination, the first step toward a bureaucratic career. His father beams proudly. "You'll serve the empire," he says. Geo smiles faintly, thinking, I'd rather serve the sky. But he studies anyway, reciting lines from the Book of Changes, tracing the characters for destiny and virtue. Yet even those ancient texts can't stop him from noticing how the hexagrams resemble shifting clouds. Everything changes, he murmurs. Even the symbols that describe change. You catch him one evening comparing weather patterns to moral patterns. Perhaps storms come when the world is too proud, he says, and gentle breezes when it learns humility. You tease him, and droughts. He grins. When scholars talk too much. He wins the local examination easily, the examiners impressed by his graceful calligraphy, unaware that his metaphors about drifting virtue and gathering righteousness are coded descriptions of the sky. Now bound for the provincial academy, he packs his few belongings: brushes, inkstones, his lucky sky stone, and a scroll of poems about rain. His mother tucks a small charm into his sleeve. For clear skies, she says. Irony intended, perhaps. The journey to the capital takes weeks. You walk beside him through mountain passes where fog rolls like liquid silver. He stops constantly to watch it move, sometimes refusing to continue until he's sketched the way mist curls over pine branches. Every mountain is a teacher, he says softly. When he finally reaches the academy gates, he looks up, not at the grandeur of the buildings but at the vastness of the sky behind them. He whispers, "Heaven has no curriculum, but I will learn it anyway." Historians still argue whether this moment, recorded in later biographies, actually happened, or was simply a literary flourish added centuries later. It doesn't matter. Standing beside him, drenched in twilight, you can feel it. The beginning of something enormous, invisible, and entirely sincere. The first droplets of rain fall just as the academy bell tolls. Geo raises his hand, lets a drop land on his palm, and smiles. My first lesson, he says, is never to wait for clear skies. Morning mist drifts through the academy's courtyard like unrolled parchment. You walk beside the scholar, now older, robe neatly pressed, expression half serious, half skyward, as he crosses the stone bridge toward the administrative building. The air smells faintly of ink and wet bamboo. Somewhere, a clerk is already shouting about delayed reports, while another student recites poetry loud enough to sound like a declaration of war. Bureaucracy, you realize, is just weather that never clears. Gao has earned his first official post, a low-ranking assistant in the Imperial Meteorological Office, a place so crowded with scrolls it feels like living inside a library's stomach. His duties? Record rainfall totals, copy wind direction tables, and file them neatly into lacquered cabinets. Nothing in the job description says anything about clouds. Naturally, that's what he studies first. You stand behind him as he fills out a daily weather ledger. Date, 3rd month, 6th day. Rain, none. Wind, light from the east. Notes, sky unsettled, gray-bellied, murmuring. He hesitates, tapping the brush tip against the page, tempted to add more, but the supervisor clears his throat. Observations, not poetry, he reminds. Gao smiles politely and obeys, though the poetry keeps happening anyway. Mainstream fact: Tang meteorologists were primarily concerned with predicting floods and droughts. Their observations were ritual as much as scientific, tied to state legitimacy. If heaven flooded the fields, the emperor's virtue was in question. Weather, in short, was politics disguised as rainfall. Gao knows this. He also knows the empire doesn't care whether a cirrostratus or a cumulonimbus caused the downpour. But he cares deeply. Too deeply. At lunch, while the others gossip about promotions and concubines, Gao sketches the sky on spare scraps of paper. They call this gray uniform, he murmurs. But look closer, there are layers within layers. No two patches of sky are ever the same. A senior officer laughs. You'll waste your brush on nonsense, friend. Clouds can't be counted. GAO shrugs. Neither can lies. But we still try. The room goes uncomfortably quiet. You can tell this won't be his last awkward lunch. Still, he keeps working, quietly compiling his own secondary records. In the margins of official tables, he adds symbols for cloud shapes, small spirals, wisps, and triangles. Soon, his personal cloud code covers whole pages. It's the Empire's first unacknowledged cloud taxonomy, disguised as administrative neatness. Tang bureaucrats were notorious for inventing unnecessary departments. One chronicler joked that if heaven itself needed paperwork, China would already have an office for it. Gao's secret wish? To create an office of clouds. He even drafts a mock proposal. Let the Empire study vapor, for it, too, shapes the world. He never submits it, of course. He's not suicidal. But he does read it aloud to you one evening, laughing so hard he nearly spills his ink. Historians still argue whether such a proposal existed. Some say it's an apocryphal story added by later poets who admired Gao's eccentricity. But a few surviving Tang letters reference a junior official who wished to measure heaven's breadth. That's our man. One evening, as the sun bleeds out behind the rooftops, Gao climbs the observatory tower with his notebook. Below, the city clatters with evening drums. Above, the world turns into a watercolor wash. He sketches until darkness swallows detail, noting how one towering formation devours another. The guard beside him mutters, "Storm's coming." Gao just nods. Every empire thinks it can name its storms. The next morning, the rain hits hard, sheets of silver pounding the tiles. The meteorological office bursts into action, clerks running like startled chickens. Gao, drenched, runs outside with a measuring bowl, delighted. He's not supposed to enjoy storms, but he can't help it. The world feels honest when it rains. Later, over tea, he tries to explain it to his skeptical colleague. A storm is like truth, he says. Loud, inconvenient, impossible to ignore. The colleague frowns. Truth doesn't feed farmers. Gao smiles faintly. Neither do bureaucrats. You can't tell whether he's fearless or simply bad at self-preservation. When the skies finally clear, he stays behind, spreading his soaked pages across the floor to dry. The ink has bled into strange halos, accidental art. He sighs. Even ruined pages record something. That night, he writes his first real treatise draft, Classification of Heaven's Vapors. It's equal parts science and poetry, observations about how clouds form from air's breath, rise with warmth, and dissolve with cold. He proposes that their colors reflect sunlight at different angles, an insight modern meteorologists would later echo. He doesn't claim divine revelation, just careful looking. Then, disaster, or, depending on your taste for chaos, comedy. His supervisor discovers the draft and brings it to the director, who frowns at the poetic title. Vapors, he repeats. Is this about incense or rebellion? Gao stammers a defense about weather study, but it's too late. The director waves a hand. You are not paid to philosophize the sky. File your reports. You almost feel the sting of humiliation as he bows, retrieves his manuscript, and tucks it away. But there's a glint in his eye. You know what that look means. The storm hasn't passed, it's just changing shape. Weeks later, an unexpected inspection from the Ministry of Rights arrives. Gao's superior panics. And guess who gets ordered to prepare a last-minute summary of celestial patterns? Gao spends the entire night rewriting his suppressed treatise into something presentable. He removes all the metaphors, keeps the data neat, and calls it supplemental weather observations. The inspectors skim it, nod approvingly, and move on. Ironically, that plain summary becomes the first official acknowledgement of his methods. Bureaucracy, meet irony. Historians still argue whether Gao's supplemental observations influenced later Chinese meteorology. Some believe the idea of systematic cloud observation quietly entered the imperial manuals after his time. Others say it was too fringe, too poetic to matter. But that's history's trick. It hides rebellion inside routine. You leave the office with him at dusk. The sky is clear again, peach-colored and forgiving. Jiao looks up, exhaling. They only see weather when it ruins crops, he murmurs. I see it when it breathes. He laughs softly, half at himself. Maybe I should have been a poet. Maybe you already are, you answer. And for a moment, as the first stars bloom above the city, you can almost believe the empire has room for one man who wants to catalogue clouds. You wake before dawn to the sound of thunder rolling like a drum rehearsal. The scholars' quarters are a chaos of parchment and puddles. Last night's storm crept through the window and soaked half his notes. He's crouched over them now, candle guttering beside him, brush poised as though he could paint the rain back into the clouds it fell from. A lesson, he mutters, wringing out a page. Never trust heaven's drafts. Outside, the streets glisten. The smell of wet clay, horse dung, and ozone makes the air thick enough to chew. You follow Jiao up a winding stair toward the city's northern watchtower, the highest point in Luoyang. From up here, the roofs look like lacquered beetle shells and the horizon is one long, boiling line of thunderclouds. The scholar sets his inkstone on the parapet, unrolls fresh paper, and begins sketching with manic precision. The guard on duty frowns. Orders are to stay inside during lightning, sir. Jiao glances at the sky. Lightning won't strike a moving brush. You lean away from the railing just in case. Mainstream historical fact. Tang-era observers did climb high towers to watch celestial phenomena, comets, eclipses, auroras. The Bureau of Astronomy even had a thunder section, which logged the timing and direction of lightning bolts. Those records survive, brittle and smoke-stained, describing storms as if they were royal visitors. But Gao's not here for the bureaucracy. He's transfixed by the vertical drama, dark anvils blooming upward, flashes illuminating their bellies like divine lanterns. He notes how one cloud seems to breathe, swelling and collapsing. The heavens are alive, he murmurs, and nobody's taking attendance. Raindrops speckle his scroll. He doesn't flinch. You huddle beneath your sleeve, watching ink and rain merge into smoky patterns. You're going to ruin it, you say. He grins. Then I'll draw the ruin. The wind lashes. The brush trembles. Every stroke becomes a battle between precision and chaos. You can almost hear the storm laughing at his determination. Ancient Chinese weather observers sometimes burned incense during storms, believing the fragrant smoke could coax heaven into clearer writing. Jiao, ever the contrarian, tries it once, sets a small incense stick beside his ink and declares, "If heaven's handwriting improves, I'll add it to the acknowledgements." It doesn't. The storm only grows louder, as if insulted. Historians still argue whether Gao's tower sketches were real or metaphorical. Some chronicles describe a mad scribe who climbed in thunder to paint the sky, while others claim the phrase simply meant thinking dangerously. Either way, his reputation begins here, half scientist, half lunatic. Hours pass. The city below vanishes in mist. The world narrows to gray, wind, and his slow breathing. He alternates between frantic sketching and still observation, as if waiting for the sky to blink first. Then, suddenly, Lightning tears across the clouds, a pure white line that splits the air with surgical precision. The flash reflects on his wet page, leaving a ghost image that glows for an instant. He whispers, "That's the shape of sound." When the rain finally relents, Gao's robe is soaked, his fingers stained black-blue. He looks exhilarated, almost boyish. You hand him a towel. He laughs. They'll call this madness, but perhaps madness is just early discovery. Back in his quarters, he spreads the damp sketches along the floor, numbering them. You watch him scribble notes about vertical motion, condensing vapors, and descending air currents. He's building a theory that storms aren't random froth but circulation, the sky's attempt to balance itself. He writes, "Thunder is not anger. It is conversation among clouds." Later, over kanji, he tells you about a memory from childhood, how he once hid under a willow during a thunderstorm, terrified, and saw that the lightning didn't destroy the tree but split one branch neatly in half. "It made order out of terror," he says. "That's when I decided storms have grammar." The next morning, he's summoned to explain himself to his superior, who's heard rumors of his tower escapades. The director sighs, "You can't study lightning, Joe. You'll get yourself killed and bring shame on our office." "Better lightning than paperwork," Gao mutters. "What?" "I said I'll be more careful." The punishment? A temporary suspension, officially for reckless observation, unofficially for having better metaphors than the director. During his forced leave, he retreats to a friend's countryside estate, a peaceful patch of hills where clouds graze lazily over rice terraces. Here, free from bureaucracy, Gao sketches non-stop. He notes how morning fog burns away differently depending on slope and vegetation. He experiments with ink wash techniques to capture softness without outlines. Lines, he explains, are lies. The sky has no edges. One evening, lightning flickers again beyond the hills, silent and distant. He sits cross-legged, brush idle, and whispers, "Heaven paints faster than any man." Historians still argue whether this exile period marked his artistic awakening or his scientific decline. Some claim he began blending Taoist philosophy with protometeorology, turning observation into meditation. Others insist he simply needed a break from the paperwork. Both might be true. By the time he returns to Luoyang, his sketches have doubled, his confidence hardened like dry ink. He tells you, a storm doesn't need permission to exist. Neither do ideas. He resumes his post quietly. Colleagues notice he no longer reacts to mockery. He just smiles and looks upward, as if seeing something they can't. And sometimes, when thunder rumbles far away, you swear the corners of his mouth twitch in secret recognition, like old friends exchanging coded greetings. The monsoon has passed, and the air smells faintly of warm earth and ink. You walk with Gao through the outer courtyards of the Imperial Observatory, a sprawling complex where astronomy, mathematics, and superstition share the same teapot. Bronze instruments gleam in the early light, armillary spheres the size of wagons, gnomons stabbing at the sky, and long sighting tubes polished by generations of anxious apprentices. The place feels half laboratory, half temple. Gao pauses beside a massive bronze disc etched with constellations. "The Bureau of Astronomy," he murmurs, "heaven's most prestigious bureaucracy." His tone drips with affectionate sarcasm. "We measure the stars, chart eclipses, predict the future, and never look down to see what's actually happening beneath our feet." A clerk passes, bowing slightly. Gao bows back, expression unreadable. You sense he's been transferred here not as a promotion, but as containment. The Empire, apparently, has decided that if he insists on staring at the sky, he might as well do it under supervision. Mainstream fact. The Tang Observatory really was an administrative powerhouse, responsible for calendars, celestial omens, and even the regulation of festival dates. It blended science, ritual, and politics. Missing an eclipse prediction wasn't just a mistake, it was treason. Gao, now a mid-level official, must tread carefully. Inside, he's assigned to the Weather Records Division, a dim hall lined with bamboo shelves and ancient scrolls. The room hums with the dry murmur of brushes against paper. Clerks copy and recopy tables of wind direction and rainfall. Occasionally, one sighs in existential despair. Gao's desk sits by a window overlooking the courtyard. Perfect view of the sky. Dangerous gift. He begins to systematize his private observations, organizing clouds by altitude, shape, and transformation. He writes, high vapors, thin as silk, herald the shifting of wind. Middle vapors, light and soft, promise rain. Low vapors, thick and shadowed, march like armies. He even sketches how sunlight refracts through different moisture densities, an insight centuries ahead of his time. You lean over his shoulder. The drawings are exquisite, half scientific diagram, half watercolor poem. You're building something new, you whisper. He nods. Heaven's Bureau of Weather. The phrase hangs in the air, equal parts joke and prophecy. The Tang Observatory kept a pet crane. Legend said it would cry before heavy rain, a living barometer. Gao, ever skeptical, tests the theory for weeks. When the crane cries every morning regardless of weather, he notes dryly, predicts only hunger. He writes the line in the corner of a weather log. You can almost see the supervisor's future headache. Historians still argue whether Gao's Heaven's Bureau of Weather was an actual proposal or a later embellishment. Some fragments of administrative memos refer to experiments in vapor classification, but those could just as easily mean incense studies. Still, the legend persists. A scholar who wanted to catalogue clouds as carefully as constellations. He spends months collecting data. Each dawn, he ascends the observatory tower, recording the sky's complexion like a physician taking heaven's pulse. Mist before sunrise means rain before dusk, he notes. But not always. That not always is crucial, his quiet rebellion against fatalism. One afternoon, an imperial astrologer stops by his table. The man squints at Gao's sketches. Pretty, he says, but useless. Clouds are heaven's moods, not measurements. Gao smiles thinly. Moods can be charted too. The astrologer blinks, unsure whether he's been insulted. By evening, Gao's table is piled with scrolls labeled Vapor of Dragons, Vapor of Morning, Vapor of Renewal. It's half mystical nomenclature, half scientific shorthand. The Empire wants omens. He gives them data wrapped in poetry. You watch him mark patterns, how certain shapes cluster before seasonal rains, how others vanish before cold snaps. He develops early versions of what modern meteorologists might call cloud stratification. Of course, he describes it with Tang flair. Some clouds are courtiers, they gather and disperse with ceremony. Others are monks, they drift alone, unbothered by the world. His assistant, a nervous young scribe, peers over and asks, Master Zhou, will the emperor read this? He laughs softly. The emperor barely reads the sky, let alone my notes. Still, a rumor spreads. Gao's work tames the heavens. Soon curious scholars and poets visit, asking to see the cloud records. Some mock, others marvel. One poet insists that Gao's classification system proves the Tao itself, the way of vapor and void. Another insists it's blasphemy, claiming only gods may name the forms of heaven. Gao listens, amused. Let them argue, he tells you. Clouds have always needed interpreters. Then comes a small triumph. During a drought, Gao predicts rainfall based on the sudden appearance of high cirrus bands. 2 days later, a downpour. The local governor praises the observatory for its accurate celestial interpretation. Gao doesn't correct him. "Let heaven keep the credit," he murmurs. Historians still argue whether this prediction was coincidence or the first scientific forecast in Chinese history. Either way, it boosts his reputation. Invitations arrive from scholars seeking to learn his methods. Bureau chiefs suddenly act like they've always supported him. Bureaucratic weather, it seems, changes faster than the real kind. At night, he walks alone among the instruments. The bronze spheres catch moonlight, spinning with the whisper of centuries. He traces their markings and thinks about order, how humans crave patterns in chaos, how even the emperor depends on predictable skies. "Perhaps heaven tolerates our charts," he says quietly, "so long as we remember they are only sketches." Lightning flashes far away, pale and soundless. He smiles. Still editing. You notice his hand trembles slightly as he rolls up his scrolls. He's pushing too hard, sleeping too little. Obsession burns slow but bright in him now, like a lantern running low on oil. You want to tell him to rest, but he's already writing again, murmuring about classifying lightning next. As you leave him in that candlelit hall, surrounded by clouds he can never touch, you realize this observatory isn't a cage, it's his cathedral. Every stroke of ink is a prayer to the ungovernable. The tea house smells faintly of jasmine and burnt charcoal, a comfortable haze that makes you drowsy before the first sip. You sit with Gao at a small lacquered table beside a paper screen painted with cranes and swirling mists. Outside, a drizzle softens the rooftops of Chang'an. Inside, conversation steams as hot as the tea. Around you, the city's finest thinkers gather: geomancers, monks, astrologers, and a few bureaucrats who pretend not to be curious. The topic: Gao's cloud records. His scrolls have leaked beyond the observatory, stirring both admiration and alarm. Some say he's discovered heaven's grammar, others say he's rewritten it without permission. The first to speak is a Daoist adept with eyebrows so long they brush his cup. "Clouds," he declares, "are qi made visible, the breath of the world. They show how heaven exhales and earth inhales." Gao nods politely, stirring his tea. Then, he says softly, "Perhaps it's possible to study heaven's breath the way physicians study a patient's pulse." A scholar in official robes snorts. "Nonsense. We chart the heavens by stars, not by vapors. Clouds are illusions, not instruments." Gao smiles thinly. "Illusions can still reveal truth, if you pay attention." Mainstream historical fact: in Tang China, weather was not purely meteorological, it was moral and cosmic. Officials interpreted droughts, storms, and eclipses as reflections of imperial virtue. If thunder struck near the capital, someone's conduct was to blame. The Bureau of Astronomy regularly issued moral advice disguised as forecasts. But Gao's approach feels heretical. He seeks pattern without moral pretext. Clouds, to him, aren't omens of sin but phenomena of nature. Radical stuff for a civilization built on cosmic hierarchy. The monk beside you pours more tea and says gently, "All things manifest the Tao, but not all things should be measured." Gao laughs quietly. "And yet we measure rice, silk, taxes, even poems. Why not clouds?" That earns a ripple of uneasy laughter. The geomancer adjusts his compass and asks whether certain cloud shapes might indicate dragon veins, those invisible currents of Earth's energy that determine good fortune. Gao admits some correlation. Certain pressure systems do precede geological shifts, but he refuses to call it magic. "Heaven and earth," he says, "are one instrument. I only read the dials. The monk shakes his head. You read too much. You prayed too hard, Geo replies, and they both smile. The Tang court occasionally held cloud divination contests, where astrologers interpreted shapes seen above the palace. Winners were rewarded with silk, losers sometimes demoted. One chronicler claims an unlucky participant once identified an imperial dragon cloud as a tired donkey. Geo loves that story. He repeats it often, usually when his superiors visit. As the tea cools, you sense tension beneath the surface. The officials want Gao's data, but they fear its implications. If weather obeys no moral order, the emperor's mandate of heaven might be negotiable. Dangerous idea. Historians still argue whether this famous debate actually occurred or was dramatized in later centuries. Some sources describe it as a gentle symposium, others as a shouting match that nearly ended with Gao's arrest. The truth likely sits between, civil words masking sharp edges. The conversation shifts. A Confucian scholar claims Gao's classifications lack ritual propriety. Names must reflect virtue, he insists. To label clouds by shape alone is to strip heaven of its dignity. Gao's reply is a slow smile. Dignity is in the eye of the observer. Besides, heaven never signed the naming decree. The room chuckles again, though a few frowns deepen. You can tell Gao is walking a tightrope, half philosopher, half jester. His wit protects him as much as it endangers him. Then, in a moment of boldness, he unfurls one of his smaller scrolls, a watercolor panel of layered cumulus. Behold, he says. This form precedes rain within a day. I have 27 such records, all consistent. A hush falls. The scholar peers closely. You claim to predict heaven. I claim to observe it, Gao corrects. Prediction is merely confidence in repeated observation. You catch his eye. He looks exhilarated, defiant, almost boyish. The same spark from his tower sketches still burns here, only now it's aimed at centuries of dogma. The monk sighs. What will you call your system, then? The Tao of Clouds. Gao tilts his head, thoughtful. No. The discipline of looking. For a moment, even the bureaucrats go silent. The phrase lands like a stone in a pond, rippling through their notions of scholarship and faith alike. Outside, the drizzle thickens. You watch as steam from their cups merges with mist beyond the open door. Tea house clouds joining sky clouds. Gao notices too. You see, he says softly. Heaven hides in teapots. You can't help laughing, startling a passing servant. By dusk, the gathering dissolves. The officials mutter about further review. The monks retreat into prayer. The geomancer pockets a few coins, declaring he's discovered a new lucrative alignment. Gao stays behind to finish his tea, which has gone completely cold. You shouldn't provoke them, you murmur. I didn't, he replies, smiling. I only asked them to look up. He gazes out at the street, where wet banners flap against the grey. They call me arrogant, he adds. But truly, I just want to name what I see before the wind changes it. Later that night, you follow him through the empty marketplace. The rain has cleared, leaving a half-moon haloed in mist. He pauses beneath it, tilts his head, and traces patterns with his finger like a conductor coaxing music from silence. Every empire, he whispers, believes heaven watches it. I watch back. The phrase will echo through centuries, misunderstood and misquoted by poets and historians alike. Some will say it's proof of rebellion, others of devotion. You, standing there in the damp air, know it's simply the truth of a man who cannot stop wondering. And high above, a lone cloud drifts eastward, its edge catching moonlight, its heart full of secrets that still haven't settled. Morning creeps in pale and damp, the kind of dawn that smells like unrolled parchment and pond water. You find Gio bent over his desk again, sleeves pushed up, eyes hollow with sleeplessness. But there's joy here too, a feverish, childlike energy. He's no longer just classifying, he's storytelling. You peek at the scroll he's working on. It isn't a scientific chart anymore. It's a tapestry of watercolor swirls and calligraphy, each cloud given a title that sounds like something between mythology and field observation. The silk dragon, the widow's sleeve, the mountain that moves without moving. This is new, you whisper. He grins without looking up. I realize numbers can't hold what the eye sees. So I borrowed from legends. The old poets made the stars into heroes. I'm giving the clouds their kin. The candle sputters beside him, wax bleeding like slow rain. He turns another sheet and sketches a low, gray stratus. Underneath, he writes, "Vapor of grieving fishermen." Then a note in smaller script, often seen after coastal storms, heavy with sea salt, prone to vanish before noon. Mainstream historical fact: Tang-era scholars often blurred the lines between science and poetry. Nature wasn't studied apart from art, it was expressed through it. The Book of Mountains and Seas, centuries older, had already mingled geography with myth. Gao is just extending that tradition into the sky. Still, his fusion of observation and folklore feels daring. The Empire loves order, but Gao prefers patterns that breathe. If I must present clouds to courtiers, he muses, I'll let them meet old spirits wearing new faces. You chuckle. And if the spirits object, then they can write their own catalogue. He brushes a final stroke, leans back, and you both admire the page. Beautiful, eccentric, and probably a bureaucratic nightmare. Word of his cloud atlas spreads quickly, carried by scholars who half understand it and poets who understand it too well. Soon, traveling bards perform verses inspired by his titles. You hear one at the marketplace, chanting about the white fox of the western sky that heralds the emperor's benevolence. Gio overhears too and mutters, "Ah yes, benevolence in vapor form. Flattering nonsense." Some Tang calligraphers genuinely believed that certain cloud shapes were heaven practicing its handwriting. They claimed to see characters forming briefly in the mist. Gio once climbed a hill at dawn just to test it. Heaven, he later wrote dryly, spells atrociously. But these tales give him an idea. He begins pairing each cloud form with a short parable, simple fables to help common readers remember them. The cloud that imitates mountains warns travelers to delay. It grows from wind that fears stillness. The cloud shaped like a boat means peace, for the sky itself wishes to cross no river. He's turning meteorology into a bedtime storybook, though he doesn't realize it. People remember stories, he tells you, not measurements. If they can remember one, perhaps they'll respect the other. Historians still argue whether his mythic catalogue ever reached completion or remained a series of drafts. Some fragments survive, illustrations of dragons, cranes, and phoenixes shaped from vapor, annotated in small, hurried notes. They read like dreams trying to explain themselves. Still, Gio treats it as serious work. He starts referencing ancient Taoist texts, Buddhist sutras, and even early weather proverbs. Every legend, he says, is an old observation retold by someone with better prose. You accompany him on field excursions into the countryside, where he sketches clouds above rice paddies while farmers glance up warily. "Master," one calls out, "is it an omen?" Gao waves his brush like a flag. "Only if you're superstitious, or late on taxes." He laughs, but you see the weariness hiding under the humor. The man's balancing act grows delicate. The imperial scholars think his gone whimsical, the poets think his gone divine. Neither group is entirely wrong. As dusk falls, Jiao tells you a story of his own invention. Once, he says, there was a dragon who wanted to paint the world, but his ink was too heavy. So he painted with vapor. His paintings faded, so he painted again, every day, forever. That's why clouds move, so the dragon won't forget his art. You ask if he believes it. He smiles. No. But it's beautiful enough to deserve existing. That night, he finishes another page, the calligraphy smooth and sure, vapor of reconciliation, when two storms meet and neither wins. You think he's describing himself more than the weather. A candle pops. The shadows ripple. Outside, a faint rumble of thunder rolls over Chang'an. Jiao steps to the window and gazes up at the gathering sky. They'll laugh, he murmurs. They always laugh. But centuries from now, someone will look up and try to name what they see. Maybe they'll get closer than I did. You want to reassure him, but the moment is too tender to break. The room fills with golden light, the kind that feels almost liquid. The ink on his scrolls shines briefly before drying, little puddles of weather trapped on paper. Historians still argue whether Gao's manuscripts were meant for scientific preservation or artistic immortality. One surviving note reads simply, "A record must breathe, or it is only dust." You sit beside him until the candle burns low, watching clouds roll beyond the lattice window, creatures of vapor, gods of impermanence, and the scholar's only true friends. When he finally sets down his brush, his voice is barely a whisper. If heaven hides in teapots, then it surely dreams in clouds. You nod. And you're the one writing down its dreams. He laughs softly. Let's hope I don't get accused of forgery. Outside, rain begins again, steady and patient, washing ink from the streets, but never from his mind. The palace corridors smell of sandalwood and fear. You follow Jiao through a maze of red lacquered pillars and whispering courtiers, his freshly copied scrolls tucked under one arm. His robe is pressed, his hair neatly tied, but his ink-stained fingers betray him. This is the day he presents his work to the emperor. Two eunuchs lead you both into the hall of heavenly patterns, where golden dragons coil up the beams and sunlight spills through carved screens. The air feels heavy with protocol, like trying to breathe underwater. Jiao bows low, the movement slow, deliberate, and almost reverent. At the far end sits the Son of Heaven, eyes half-lidded behind a curtain of gauze. You glimpse jewels, silk, and a single faint smile, curiosity tempered by boredom. The chamberlain's voice rings out, Jiao Wenxiu, assistant scholar of the Imperial Observatory, presenting his treatise Heaven's Bureau of Weather. The courtiers murmur. Some suppress smirks. You can almost hear the words madman and cloud counter floating like gnats. Jiao steps forward and kneels. Your Majesty, he begins, voice steady. We record the stars, the floods, the earthquakes. Yet the clouds, which veil heaven's moods from day to day, remain uncatalogued. I humbly offer this work to fill that silence. He opens the scroll. Painted clouds shimmer across silk, cumulus in shades of pearl, thin cirrus like threads of silver, thunderheads rolling in indigo shadow. Tiny calligraphic notes wind between them, delicate as breath. Mainstream historical fact. Tang emperors frequently commissioned celestial records and meteorological notes. The court treated weather as divine communication. Anomalies, like hail out of season or red lightning, were interpreted as cosmic warnings. Submitting a treatise on the heavens wasn't unusual. Submitting one that treated heaven as observable matter was. The emperor leans forward. You name the clouds. Jiao bows deeper. I name their patterns, Majesty, that we might know the sky as we know the soil, by its temperament. Temperament, the emperor repeats, intrigued. Do the clouds have character, then? Each does, Gao replies. Some are loyal, some deceitful, some vanish before their duty is done. He glances up, not unlike courtiers. The court erupts in uneasy laughter. You pinch the bridge of your nose. He really can't help himself. But the emperor laughs too, a short, genuine bark. You have a bold tongue, scholar Gao. I only speak as the wind does, Majesty, swift, invisible, but occasionally useful. That owns another chuckle, and the tension softens. Gao rises at the emperor's gesture and unrolls a second scroll, charts correlating cloud forms with rainfall, crop yields, and even recorded omens. Here, he explains, you see that auspicious clouds appear not by decree, but by temperature and wind. Heaven obeys physics, not favoritism. The court quiets. You feel the weight of his words. In a hall built on divine right, suggesting that heaven follows natural law is, well, let's call it bold bordering on suicidal. A senior astrologer clears his throat. Majesty, he says smoothly, if heaven follows no moral order, what meaning remains in the mandate itself? Gao turns to him, bowing slightly. Meaning, venerable sir, is the emperor's virtue in governing earth, not his ability to command the sky. Heaven blesses wise rule not by clear skies, but by calm hearts. It's a brilliant save, half philosophy, half survival instinct. The emperor nods slowly, eyes gleaming. So you claim to read the sky without reading heaven? Yes, Majesty. For even heaven must write its thoughts somewhere. There's a long pause. The kind that feels like the edge of lightning. Finally, the emperor waves his sleeve. Very well. I will keep your work in the imperial library. Perhaps heaven itself will admire your audacity. The courtiers exhale as one. Gao bows deeply, relief hidden behind serenity. You feel your pulse slow again. Later, outside the hall, he grins at you. Not executed, he whispers. A promising start. You both laugh, softly enough that the guards don't notice. In some records, Gao's presentation was followed by an actual storm. A sudden downpour drenched the palace courtyard, scattering scrolls and soaking officials. One chronicler wrote, even the heavens wept with laughter at the scholar who tried to name them. Gao, of course, noted the timing in his weather log. Historians still argue whether this rain was coincidental, orchestrated exaggeration, or poetic license added by later storytellers. The palace archives, if they still exist, are silent. But the legend endures. A scholar presents a catalogue of clouds, and heaven answers in applause. That night, Gao sits on the veranda, watching raindrops ripple through palace lantern light. You sit beside him, half soaked, half awed. Well, you ask, was it worth the risk? He hums. Risk is the only weather worth studying. You both watch as the storm tapers off, clouds glowing like ghosts above the forbidden moat. The emperor laughed. Joe murmurs. That's better than approval. Laughter lingers longer. He takes out a small notebook and writes, when heaven laughs, take cover. Then closes it, smiling. Somewhere deep inside the palace, servants carry his scrolls to the archives. The ink will fade over centuries, eaten by humidity and mice, but tonight, just tonight, the clouds above Chang'an have names, and one scholar's voice echoes faintly in heaven's hall. The summer that follows is unlike any in memory. You wake one morning to find the sunlight dim and the air strangely cold, as though the world has slipped into shadow. Gao stands outside, staring up at a sky toned the color of bruised silk. There are no edges, he murmurs. Only haze. Dust dulls the horizon, a faint metallic taste in the wind. Farmers whisper that heaven is angry again. Monks chant for balance. Gao just squints. Anger leaves sharper lines, he says. Mainstream historical fact. Around 626 CE, Chinese records mention a year when the sun shone faintly like the moon. Modern scientists suspect it was caused by a massive volcanic eruption somewhere on the globe, perhaps Mount Ilopango or a precursor event to the Icelandic Veðurvötn eruption, filling the stratosphere with ash. Crops failed, sunsets turned blood red, and across empires, people wondered whether the world was ending. For Gao, it's the ultimate test. His tidy system collapses overnight. Cloud shapes dissolve into uniform gray. No cirrus, no cumulus, only a suffocating pall. My categories are blind, he admits. The sky has gone unclassified. He sets up instruments on the observatory roof. Bowls of water to measure dust fall, silk threads to detect static, even a mirror angled to catch sunlight. The reflection stays dull, no matter how he polishes it. Imagine, he tells you, if heaven suddenly stopped writing. How do we read silence? He tries humor to mask his unease. Maybe the sky's gone minimalist. Too much commentary lately. But his hands tremble slightly as he writes the day's entry. The color of despair, unmeasurable. During real Tang-era sun-dimming events, people reported seeing phantom suns, ghostly rings or twin disks at dawn. Gao sketches one, labeling it heaven's misprint. You can't help but laugh, and he does too, weakly. Days turn into weeks. The haze persists. Rice seedlings wither. The city grows anxious. Officials beg the Bureau of Astronomy for explanation, but no one dares call it natural. One memorial to the throne even suggests, a dragon has swallowed the sun. Gao groans when he reads it. Typical dragon scapegoating. Yet he feels helpless. His system depends on clarity, on contrast between cloud types. This endless veil mocks him. How can I catalogue what refuses to be seen? Historians still argue whether Gao's lost summer entries describe meteorological reality or poetic metaphor. The surviving fragments oscillate between precision and despair. One line reads, "When heaven erases its handwriting, perhaps it waits for us to write instead." The emperor, alarmed by famine reports, orders rituals to appease heaven. Gao is summoned to contribute an interpretation. The irony nearly kills him. "They want me to translate nothingness," he mutters. That evening, you accompany him to the palace courtyard. Drums echo. Priests burn silk offerings, their smoke merging with the natural haze until the whole sky becomes one trembling sheet of gray. Gao stands apart, refusing to kneel. "They pray to clouds they cannot see," he says softly. "Maybe that's faith. Maybe that's madness." One official glares. "Show respect, scholar." "I am," Joe replies. "To the truth." It's not the answer they wanted. Afterward, he's reprimanded and told to rest from public duties. A polite way to exile a troublesome mind. He returns home, stripped of his post but not his curiosity. You find him in his courtyard, trying to paint the color of air. He mixes soot, water, and powdered jade. None match. "This is my punishment," he sighs. "Not disgrace, uncertainty." You sit beside him under the dull sky. The birds no longer sing. Even the wind seems cautious. He takes out a scrap of paper and sketches a faint outline, barely visible. "There," he says. "The shape of absence." You tell him it's beautiful. He smiles. Then maybe the sky still speaks, just in whispers. For weeks, the world remains subdued. The haze mutates the sunsets into violent oranges and violets. Gao begins documenting those instead, the emotional weather of heaven. Perhaps, he muses, the sky isn't hiding, it's grieving. His notes grow more introspective. A scientist measures, a poet endures. The gray sky is a confession that light has limits. Historians still debate whether these melancholic passages mark the birth of atmospheric aesthetics in Chinese literature. Some credit Gao's Year Without Shadows for influencing later song poets like Su Shi, who wrote of skies that speak without words. Months later, the haze finally breaks. One dawn, a single blue streak appears in the east. Gao watches it in silence, tears streaking his cheeks. There, he whispers, heaven remembers itself. He spends the next days feverishly updating his catalogue. We must include absence, he declares. A category for what can't be seen. He titles it the unformed vapor. You glance at his trembling brush. Will the court read this? No, he says. But someday, someone will. That night, a storm rolls through, violent, cleansing, almost theatrical. Gao laughs under the downpour, arms wide. Proof, he shouts above the thunder, that even heaven drafts corrections. The rain washes the dust from his courtyard, from his papers, from your skin. For the first time in months, stars reappear, faint but real. Gao stares upward, soaked and grinning. I was wrong, he says. The sky never went silent. I just forgot how to listen. He writes one final note before sleeping. When clouds vanish, study their absence. It too has shape. You fall asleep beside the fading sound of rain, the scholar's candle still burning low, the air fresh as forgiveness. Exile arrives not as thunder but as drizzle. One morning, a messenger from the ministry bows too deeply, hands over a scroll too neatly tied. Gao breaks the seal and reads without expression. His face does not twist or tremble. Only when he folds the paper again does he murmur, "They've sent me south, to the wet provinces. I am to observe rainfall patterns for agricultural guidance." A polite phrase for banishment. You travel with him, your belongings packed into lacquered chests that feel too grand for disgrace. The journey is long, muddy roads, river crossings where mist hangs low, villages built on stilts above the floodplains. Gao keeps stopping to stare at clouds that bloom and dissolve in moments. Different vocabulary down here, he says. The sky speaks in dialects. When you reach the southern station, a bamboo hut overlooking a rice delta, it's like stepping into another world. Cicadas scream at dusk. The air is syrup thick. Sheets of rain sweep the paddies until earth and water blur. Historical records from Tang and Song dynasties note that southern scholars stationed near Lingnan often kept frogs or crickets as weather pets, believing their songs could predict rain. Gao, amused, adopts a toad and names it Minister of Moisture. The creature croaks miserably in a clay pot whenever humidity spikes. He's more accurate than the bureau, Gao jokes. Each morning, Gao walks barefoot through the mud, sketchbook balanced on a bamboo board. His cloud taxonomy now includes tropical formations unseen in the north, towering anvils, looping wisps that curl like incense. He names them poetically: dragon spines, sleeping lotus, veil of the immortal. He works obsessively, though the ink runs in the humidity. Imperial paper wasn't made for this climate, he grumbles, wringing out another ruined page. You suggest using charcoal instead. He smirks. And abandon the elegance of ink? Never. Evenings are gentler. The rain softens into mist, frogs chant, and villagers gather to hear Gao's strange lessons about clouds. They bring rice wine, not politely when he points upward with his brush. "See that one?" he says. "An omen of harvest." They cheer. "That one," he adds. "Probably just evaporation." They laugh. He's no longer a bureaucrat here, just the eccentric scholar with ink-stained sleeves and a toad. The villagers start calling him unchanging, Mr. Cloud. Mainstream historical fact. During Tang-era southern postings, exiled scholars often became beloved local teachers, writing poems and compiling field studies that later influenced geography and natural philosophy. Gao follows that pattern precisely, whether he means to or not. You notice he's happier, in a quiet way. Freedom, he muses, is sometimes just the absence of court stationery. But the monsoon months test even his patience. Torrents fall for days, rivers swell into fury, entire villages vanish underwater. One night, the wind howls so hard the hut shudders like a drum. Gao ties his scrolls to the rafters and laughs through the chaos. Perfect field conditions. When dawn comes, the roof leaks in 20 places, his bed is soaked, and frogs swim across the floor. He sits in the wreckage, sipping tea. Historians still argue whether one can measure truth while floating, he quips. You both spend days drying pages by the fire, smoke curling like thin clouds of its own. Many drawings are ruined, but Gao insists the stains add authenticity. Impermanence should be visible, he says. That's what clouds teach. He begins combining science and poetry more openly. Instead of tables and measurements, his notes read like meditations. The rain remembers what the sky forgets. Every drop is a failed cloud, still noble in descent. Some scholars later dismiss these writings as fevered exile ramblings, but others see them as the seed of a new philosophy, an early Chinese form of phenomenology. Gao himself calls it weather thinking. One night, after too much rice wine, he confides, perhaps classification was arrogance. Maybe clouds don't need names. Maybe the act of watching is enough. You tell him people will still want his catalogue, his diagrams, his order. He shrugs. Let them. Order comforts. But wonder sustains. Weeks later, a government courier arrives by boat, soaked and panting. He carries a letter stamped with the imperial seal, not punishment this time, but curiosity. The emperor, now older and increasingly philosophical, requests Gao's southern cloud observations for the bureau's archive. Gao chuckles. So exile becomes employment again. Heaven enjoys irony. He spends nights revising his manuscripts, careful yet playful. Each cloud sketch bears two labels now, one technical, one poetic. For example, convective column, the mountain that breathes. Alto stratus sheet, curtain of forgotten prayers. You help organize the pages, pressing them between oilcloths. Outside, the monsoon finally wanes. The air clears, leaving the sky so vivid it looks newly painted. Gao gazes upward and says softly, I've been studying clouds all my life, but only now do I see their mercy. They never stay to boast. Historians still argue whether his southern notebooks truly existed or were later inventions attributed to him. Some claim the cloud compendium of Lingnan was destroyed in a fire. Others say a few sheets survive, stored secretly in a monastery vault. Either way, his legend grows. As for Gao, he remains by the delta, content. He teaches children how to watch the sky. Look long enough, he tells them, and even impermanence becomes familiar. One evening, he hands you his final bamboo-bound notebook. Keep this, he says. If I die, release it into the wind. Clouds should return to clouds. You promise. He smiles faintly. Then I have nothing to fear. That night, thunder murmurs again, not in warning, but in farewell. The seasons turn again, and Gao's exile quietly ripens into legacy. You find him one dawn seated cross-legged before a low table, arranging his sketches into careful piles. At last, he says, "It's time to build the atlas." The morning mist curls around him like a slow exhalation. He looks older now, but not weary, more like a man who has made peace with the endlessness of his curiosity. The cloud atlas of the Middle Kingdom, as he calls it, is unlike anything you've ever seen. Not a dry manual, not quite poetry, not quite philosophy, something between ink and air. He spreads his drafts, delicate brush renderings of cloud forms, side by side with annotations in tiny script. Some lines are precise meteorological notes, others are gentle riddles. You read one aloud. The cirrus speaks of farewell, yet it is never gone. He grins. That's a footnote. Mainstream historical fact. Tang and Song natural philosophers often blended scientific study with poetic reflection. They believed naming a thing required understanding both its form and its spirit. Gao's atlas carries that ethos to perfection, a bridge between proto-meteorology and art. Every page should remind the reader, he says, that observation is devotion. The villagers help him gather materials. Silk sheets for durability, bamboo splints for binding, soot ink ground with oil from river nuts. He even convinces a local calligrapher to inscribe the preface, which begins, "Heaven's skin is written in vapor." This book is but a translation attempt. You spend days drying pages under weighted stones, tracing each line to ensure no smear. Some drawings seem almost alive, ink so thin it breathes with humidity. "If the clouds move, I've succeeded," he jokes. Then one afternoon, Gao unrolls a chart unlike any other. A full panorama of the sky, half real, half imagined. "This," he explains, "is the heavenly register. It maps the motion of vapor through seasons, from dragon's breath to autumn veils." His included not only shapes but behaviors, where each cloud tends to form, what it portends, how it fades. Historians believe one section of his atlas used musical notation, clouds drawn above lines that resemble a staff, suggesting their rhythm and movement through the day. "If air can hum," Joe says, "let's hear its melody." You ask him if he plans to send it north. He shakes his head. Not yet. The court reads politics into everything. Let them chase storms of ambition. I'll send this when the air is still. He does, however, write a preface addressed directly to the emperor. To measure heaven is not defiance, but gratitude. The clouds owe allegiance only to impermanence, yet they obey pattern enough to teach humility. You suspect this subtle defiance will not go unnoticed. As the atlas grows, so does Gao's following. Scholars from neighboring provinces travel days to consult him. Some are skeptics, others mystics, all curious. He welcomes each with tea and mischief. "Tell me," one asks, "why classify clouds at all? They vanish before the ink dries." Geo replies, "Then let the ink remember what the sky forgets." He laughs, but later he confides, "They think I chase illusions. Perhaps I do. But illusions shape truth's outline." Historians still argue whether Gao's atlas truly survived in full. Some claim it was copied by disciples, others that it dissolved, literally, during a flood, returning to vapor like its subject. One controversial 12th century text quotes him, "Knowledge must evaporate, or it stagnates." If authentic, it would mark the earliest recorded acceptance of impermanence as part of scientific philosophy. You notice Gao's health waning. The damp air gnaws at his lungs. Still, he refuses rest. "Clouds don't wait," he rasps, continuing to paint through coughing fits. One evening, lightning flashes over the delta. He leaps up, exhilarated. "There!" he cries. "Heaven corrects me again." You follow him outside as he sketches by lightning's brief illumination, every stroke precise, ecstatic. Rain soaks the paper, but he doesn't care. Perfection, he murmurs, is learning when to stop. After the storm, he collapses into laughter. "I must add a new category," he says between breaths. The vanishing scholar cloud. Appears after thunder, disappears with reason. The atlas nears completion. He binds it in oiled bamboo covers and wraps it in silk dyed the pale gray of dawn. "It's done," he says one night, staring at the bundle as though unsure whether to release it or hold tighter. A life's work measured in vapor. You ask what he'll name the final entry. He considers, eyes distant. "The returning breath," he says. Because every cloud becomes sky again. Mainstream historians later call his cloud atlas a lost masterpiece of proto-science, though many dismiss it as apocryphal. Yet fragments quoted in later Tang texts bear unmistakable phrasing. His style, half observation, half reverence, echoes through centuries. When he finally seals the manuscript, Gao's expression is not pride but relief. "Done," he whispers. "Now the sky can have itself back." You sit with him under the night canopy, stars shimmering like 1,000 distant brushstrokes. The air smells of wet earth and ink. Gao smiles faintly. "Do you think heaven minds being studied?" You shrug. "It keeps sending clouds. Maybe it likes the attention." He chuckles. "Then I've been complimented." He closes his eyes. "I used to chase knowledge like a thief. Now I only want to thank it." You realize, watching him breathe, that his atlas isn't just about clouds. It's about acceptance, the art of witnessing change without demanding permanence. "Tomorrow," he murmurs, "we send it north." And you know he means both the atlas and the part of himself that never stopped looking up. Centuries pass like drifting vapor, and you float with them. The scholar's ink fades, but the myth of his gaze does not. Gao Wenli, Mr. Cloud, heaven's draftsman, the sky cartographer, his name survives in whispers between archivists, in the footnotes of forgotten weather treatises, in the margins of poems where the author could not resist a nod to the man who named the wind. You find yourself now in the dusty air of a Ming-era library. A junior historian sneezes over scrolls, muttering, "Ridiculous. No one could have painted clouds that accurately without foreign instruments." He dips his brush, dismissing Gao's work as legend. Across the table, another scholar protests. "And yet," she insists, "song poets quote him. The unformed vapor, the returning breath." Those titles appear in multiple sources. Coincidence? Historians still argue whether the cloud atlas of the Middle Kingdom ever truly existed. Some claim it was a collection of meditative essays, not diagrams. Others say it was copied onto rice paper that disintegrated in humidity, fittingly poetic for a man who studied impermanence. A few bold fringe researchers even suggest Gao anticipated Western meteorological categories centuries before Luke Howard's Latin naming system. Cumulus? Cirrus? They scoff. We had sleeping lotus and dragon spine first. You wander from scholar to scholar, watching the debate turn almost theatrical. Some wave bamboo slips in triumph, others gesture skyward, as if Gao himself might settle the matter by forming a cloud in protest. One eccentric antiquarian brings out a single surviving fragment, a thin silk square, edges singed, ink faint as breath. You lean closer. The line reads, "When heaven erases its handwriting, study the gesture that remains." Below it, the faint outline of a cirrus curl. The ink shimmered once with silver dust, now barely visible. Ming archivists sometimes sealed precious documents with powdered pearl to prevent insect damage. Later scholars mistook the glimmering residue as evidence of alchemy. Gao, one historian jokes, might have invented both meteorology and glitter. The debate drifts beyond libraries. Poets adopt him as a patron saint of impermanence. Painters emulate his inkazer technique, blurring outlines deliberately. One eccentric Zen monk even claims Gao was a reincarnation of the wind itself. He drew clouds, the monk says, because mirrors were too small. A generation later, Qing-era meteorologists rediscover astronomical records mentioning a southern observer of vapor patterns. They publish essays arguing Gao's charts represented early synoptic mapping, a revolutionary concept. Others dismiss it as coincidence. The Tang had philosophy, one skeptic says, not barometers. Still, his influence lingers like humidity. You see it in art, the soft gradients of Song landscapes, the way painters leave deliberate white spaces for mist. That's Gao's legacy, you realize. He taught artists that blankness has meaning. Centuries roll onward. A Jesuit missionary arriving in 17th century China brings with him Western cloud diagrams. His hosts show him a poem attributed to unchanging. The sky names itself each morning. The Jesuit writes home, they already possess the essence of meteorology, but call it poetry. Gao's myth expands. In one story, he ascends into the heavens after finishing his atlas, dissolving into mist. In another, he drops the book into the ocean, where it becomes the reflection that clouds admire. Superstitious nonsense, says one scholar. Sacred metaphor, says another. You drift through the centuries with his legend, hearing echoes of him in unlikely places. A 19th century meteorologist in London references a Chinese precursor to modern classification. A Japanese art historian argues Gao's influence reached early ukiyo-e cloud motifs. In each retelling, the facts twist slightly, yet the essence remains. A man who believed naming the sky could teach humility. Mainstream historical fact. While no authenticated manuscript survives, numerous Tang and Song texts reference early cloud observations used for agriculture and ritual timing. Whether Gao authored them or merely inspired them is uncertain. But his name appears consistently beside weather, reflection, and patience. Even today, modern historians still debate whether Gao Wenli was one man or a composite figure symbolizing early meteorological thought. Perhaps, one professor muses during a lecture you hover beside, he was invented to embody the Chinese idea of Li, pattern in flux. Clouds are structure without boundary. Gao was the scholar of that paradox. The audience chuckles. One student whispers, so he's like the patron saint of procrastination. The professor smiles. No, of observation. Which is slower, but infinitely more enduring. Some fringe theorists, always the dreamers, claim fragments of Gao's work were hidden within Buddhist sutras, coded as cloud metaphors. Read upside down, they say, the Heart Sutra reveals a meteorological key. Most historians roll their eyes, but a few secretly check. You can't help laughing softly. Gao would have loved the irony, his pursuit of impermanence becoming immortal through confusion. On clear nights, scholars still gather at observatories from Beijing to Kyoto to measure the sky's moods. Some whisper his name before beginning, like an invocation. Unchanging, lend us clarity, or at least a good cloud. And sometimes, just sometimes, the sky obliges. One twilight, a young researcher notices a peculiar formation, thin wisps curling like calligraphy strokes. She takes a photo, then stops. It looks drawn, she murmurs, like ink diluted by rain. Her mentor smiles. Then he's still working. You imagine Gao laughing somewhere above, teasing the modern instruments. "Still classifying," he'd say. "Try naming this." And the satellites, the spectrometers, the spreadsheets, all of it, would fall silent for a heartbeat, humbled by a sky that still refuses to be captured. So his atlas lives on, invisible but omnipresent, folded into every upward glance. Every scientist who hesitates before labeling a formation, every artist who paints the space between clouds, they all echo Gao Wenli, the man who catalogued what could never stay still. The historian closes her notebook, looks up at the sky outside the archive window, and whispers what has become a quiet ritual blessing among cloud watchers. "Thank you, Mr. Cloud." You rise into the thin air of the present day, where the old empire has vanished but its sky remains the same. Jet contrails streak across it like hurried brushstrokes, satellites blink coldly from their orbits, and weather balloons float where monks once meditated. Yet somewhere between those layers of data and vapor, Gao's spirit still lingers, an invisible watermark on modern curiosity. You're standing now inside a climate observatory in Chengdu. The walls hum with the low buzz of servers. Glass panels reveal screens filled with cloud imagery, infrared scans, thermal gradients, satellite mosaics stitched from millions of frames. A young scientist gestures proudly. "Each color represents water vapor content in the troposphere," she says. "We can model an entire monsoon now, second by second." You nod, imagining Gao's astonishment, and his laughter. "So," you whisper, "you've traded ink for pixels." Mainstream historical fact: China's modern meteorological programs are among the most advanced in the world. The Fengyun satellites, named after wind and cloud, orbit the planet, capturing real-time data for everything from typhoon tracking to global climate studies. The name choice isn't random. It honors centuries of sky watchers, from Han astronomers to Tang philosophers who saw heaven as a living manuscript. On one screen, the Fengyun satellite relays live footage, a massive storm spiraling over the Pacific. The pattern is hypnotic, white arcs curving like dragon claws, their motion both chaotic and ordered. You murmur, "Dragon spine." The scientist glances at you. "What was that?" "An old classification," you say. "Older than you think." She smiles politely, unaware she's standing within a lineage that began with a man and a brush. Outside, drones were overhead, sampling humidity. Inside, software calculates precipitation probabilities to 5 decimal points. Still, you sense the same impulse, the longing to read the mood of heaven. One research group actually nicknamed their AI model Unchanging, Mr. Cloud, in tribute to Gao. When asked why, their lead programmer shrugged. "Because our neural net also keeps changing its classifications." You laugh quietly. Perfect. Historians still argue whether technology fulfills Gao's dream or betrays it. Some claim satellite data finally completes his project, a global, continuous cloud atlas beyond imagination. Others say the opposite, that quantifying vapor misses the point. He sought intimacy, not mastery, one essay argues. Gao listened to clouds. We interrogate them. You watch a researcher manipulate a 3D model of a cumulonimbus, rotating it with casual precision. Gao once risked lightning to sketch that same form by hand. Progress, you whisper, but with fewer scorch marks. In the corner of the lab stands a display case, a small cultural exhibit. Inside, beneath museum lighting, lies a reproduction of a Tang silk fragment. Its caption reads, "Attributed to Gao Wenli, 7th century. Ink on silk. Possibly from the lost Cloud Atlas." Visitors pass it by quickly. Just another artifact, another rumor of a man who tried to map the ungraspable. But you linger. You can almost see the faint curve of a brushstroke, an unsteady line that looks remarkably like the edge of a cirrus drifting over Chengdu right now. You step outside, and the modern world rushes around you. Car horns, the hum of power lines, the wet smell of distant rain. Yet above it all, the same sky stretches endlessly, performing its ancient monologue. You remember Gao's words, "The sky names itself each morning." On your phone, a notification buzzes, new satellite images available. You swipe, and the clouds bloom into view, fractal, alive, magnificent. You zoom in until pixels blur, until science dissolves back into wonder. You imagine Joe standing beside you, robes fluttering, squinting at the screen. "So," he says, "this is your observatory." You nod. He peers closer. "Not bad. But where's the poetry?" You show him a time-lapse of storm formation. He studies it like a living scroll. He murmurs. Heaven still drafts without rulers. He'd recognize everything, the beauty, the chaos, the urge to name. And maybe he'd forgive us for measuring too much. Later, you visit a planetarium exhibit titled Clouds Through Time. Inside, a holographic display projects ancient cloud sketches beside satellite animations. The voiceover explains how early Chinese philosophers treated clouds as mirrors of the mind. Our data, it concludes, may now prove what they intuited. Clouds respond to heat, motion, and subtle disturbances, like thoughts in a living sky. You glance up. The ceiling dissolves into artificial vapor, shimmering blue. For a fleeting second, it feels as if Gao's atlas has returned, not as a fragile book, but as a breathing experience surrounding everyone. A child nearby tugs at her parent's sleeve. "Look, Mama, a dragon cloud." The parent laughs softly. "You mean a cumulonimbus?" The child frowns. "No. A dragon." Gao would have applauded. Historians still argue whether myth and science should ever share the same sentence. But as the holographic sky fades, you sense the boundary doesn't matter. His voice, your voice, the satellites, the poets, all are part of the same long conversation with heaven. Outside, the sun breaks through the clouds, scattering rays across the wet pavement. You look up and whisper, "You've been catalogued, old friend." But not captured. And the clouds, ever contrary, rearrange themselves into something new, half smile, half sigh, drifting away as if to say, "Good. Keep trying." You stand once more beneath the sky, no longer ancient, not quite modern, somewhere between memory and imagination. The wind carries a smell of rain and old paper. Above you, the clouds move as they always have, silent and immense, yet full of stories. It's here that Gao Wenli's journey settles, though ends is the wrong word. Nothing truly ends in his world, everything just drifts into another form. You walk through a field, the air tinted gold by dusk. Every few steps, a new cloud shape forms overhead. Billows, threads, ripples, each one echoing a stroke from his long-lost atlas. You can almost hear his voice, calm, amused, forever explaining the unexplainable. "That one," he says in your imagination, "means calm after confusion. That one, rest after effort." You smile. "And that one?" He laughs softly. "That one means you've finally stopped measuring." It's been more than 1,000 years since he lifted his brush to the heavens, but traces remain, in the poetry of diffuse skies, in the landscape mists of song painters, in every meteorologist who pauses to appreciate the beauty behind the numbers. Gao didn't just catalogue clouds. He taught the world to read the sky as reflection, to see thought and breath mirrored in vapor. Mainstream historical fact: by the 11th century, Chinese scholars were already recording cloud shapes to predict seasonal rainfall. Gao's approach, half art, half science, laid the cultural groundwork for observing atmosphere as a living pattern. Modern meteorology owes as much to aesthetics as it does to mathematics. And somewhere inside that truth, his ink still dries, very slowly. The stories about him have multiplied like drifting cirrus. Some say his students built a shrine beside the delta, where travelers could hang strips of silk painted with their favorite clouds. Others claim the shrine was swept away in a flood, leaving only a single roof beam that locals now call Heaven's Bookmark. Centuries later, that very beam was found embedded in a rice terrace wall. Farmers swore rain fell more gently near it. The scholar's kindness remains, they said, even in wood. You walk on, imagining Gao's laughter at that superstition. He never wanted worship. He wanted observation. He wanted people to notice. As night deepens, the stars pierce through, one by one. You picture his spirit among them, not as a deity, but as a presence woven into atmosphere itself. Maybe he's there in the whisper before thunder, in the hush that comes when the sky clears after rain. Historians still argue whether he existed at all. You smile at the futility of it. Does it matter? Every age invents its saints of curiosity. Gao's gift is precisely that you can't pin him down. Like his clouds, he remains ungraspable, but always overhead. You find a high ridge and sit, watching the night unfold. The Milky Way arches like a pale river, and the clouds below it drift silver under moonlight. Somewhere nearby, frogs croak, perhaps descendants of his old minister of moisture. You laugh quietly, still on duty. The air cools. Your breath fogs briefly, your own small cloud, a reminder that every exhalation is a weather event, however tiny. Gao would have liked that thought, that even the act of breathing makes you a participant in heaven's endless performance. You remember one of his last notes, written in delicate Tang characters. To study the sky is to study the self, for both are impermanent yet recurring. You whisper it aloud, and the wind seems to carry it upward. The past folds seamlessly into the present. Satellites blink overhead like fireflies, ancient constellations look down, and the same thin clouds drift between them, still unclassified, still free. Somewhere far below, in a quiet archive, a graduate student opens a restored scroll. The ink is faint but legible. In the margin, a small doodle, a toad holding a parasol. She chuckles softly, unaware she's just met Gao's sense of humor across a millennium. You look skyward one last time. The clouds gather into the shape of a great open eye, then dissolve again, leaving the stars clear and bright. And you understand what Gao meant when he said, "Heaven's handwriting is never finished." Because now, whenever someone gazes upward in wonder, scientist, poet, dreamer, they continue the sentence he began. The sky has never stopped speaking. We've simply learned better ways to listen. And as you close your eyes, lulled by the quiet rhythm of wind through grass, Gao's voice fades into a whisper of air, the sound of ink becoming mist, of thought dissolving into night. The scholar who catalogued clouds becomes one himself. As the story softens and the night stretches wide, you breathe in slowly. The air feels lighter, familiar. You've walked through dynasties, through data streams and temple courtyards, through thunder and exile, and still the same truth hovers gently above. The sky changes, always, and that is its kindness. You imagine Gao's brush resting at last, not as an end but as a pause, a long exhale across centuries. Each cloud you've ever seen was, in some quiet way, a continuation of his work. Each moment of awe beneath the open sky was his signature. Let that thought settle into you now, like dew forming on grass. You don't have to measure the world to belong in it. You don't have to understand every pattern to be part of the rhythm. You only have to notice. The clouds outside your window tonight are likely unremarkable, and that's their beauty. They drift, they dissolve, they reform. Just like thoughts. Just like days. Just like you. Breathe in the sky, breathe out the noise. Let the empire of worry dissolve into the upper air. Let everything soften. And as you finally drift towards sleep, remember the gentle humor of that old scholar who once tried to name the unnameable, and, by doing so, helped us all see the wonder in what refuses to stay still. The clouds move on. And so, peacefully, do you.